The hunter had always known fear, not his own fear, but the kind that slithered in the eyes of others when they saw him. His pale skin was considered a curse. Somewhere in the dark corners of Central Africa, men with empty souls hunted those like him, believing his flesh held power. He was once prey, but now he was the hunter. He lived in the deep bush, where the canopy swallowed light and footfalls whispered secrets to the wind. He moved like the leopard, unseen, unheard, striking only when needed. He had built a life in the shadows, far from the eyes that lusted for his bones. But death had a long reach. The first sign was the footprints. They were too many, too fresh. He found that his snares were broken and his traps were missing. These were not poachers. These were men hunting something far rarer than game. They were hunting him. The hunter adjusted his bow and arrow and sank into the forest like a ghost. If they wanted his flesh, they would have to take it from a man who had already died once before. Night fell, thick and suffocating. The hunter crouched in the undergrowth, watching. 5 men sat by a fire, their machetes glinting in the light. Their laughter was low and confident. They thought that he was weak. The hunter smiled coldly. He moved with purpose, placing snares in the bush. He climbed the trees, setting weighted traps of stones and sharpened stakes. The hunt had begun, but the rules had changed. Dawn crept in, pale and hesitant. The first scream came before the sun had fully risen. The forest belonged to him. The first man cried in agony, helpless, snared by the ankle, blood pooling beneath him from the stakes piercing his flesh. The others rushed to free him, but the hunter had already moved. A second man fell, throat sliced by an unseen hand. Panic spread among them. They had come expecting an easy kill, a helpless albino to be butchered for his body parts. Instead, they had walked into death's embrace. The hunter stalked them like the spirit of the forest, never seen, only felt. The third man ran, his instincts screaming at him to flee. The hunter let him go. Fear was a better weapon than any blade. The last 2 men huddled together, their backs against a tree, eyes darting into the shadows. They whispered prayers, but the hunter did not listen. He had heard them all before. He moved quickly, a blur in the darkness, a snap of a neck, and the gurgle of a final breath. The forest fell silent once more. But he knew that this was not the end. These men were pawns, sent by someone more powerful. More men would come to hunt him like an animal. He cleaned his blade and faded into the trees. He had survived another night, but the hunt was far from over. Then the whisper came, not from the dead, but from the wind. A woman, an albino, just like him, had been taken. His jaw tightened. This war had been personal, but now it was something else. A debt had been placed upon his soul, and he would collect it in blood. The forest held secrets. It whispered of those who had passed through it, of the desperate cries swallowed by the trees. The hunter moved like a ghost, following the faintest of signs, a snapped branch, a disturbed patch of earth, and the faint scent of sweat and malice. The men who had taken the woman were not careful. They believed no one would come for her, but they were wrong. Each step was measured, each breath controlled. He found the place where she had been dragged, the small impressions of her struggling feet telling their own story. The captors had moved quickly, eager to deliver their prize, to whatever dark purpose awaited her. He would have to move faster. The hunter had once been in the same situation like her, stolen in the night, bound and helpless. But he had escaped, he had learned, and now he hunted the hunters. The river's edge revealed more clues, deep footprints, signs of a hurried crossing. He waded in, the cold biting his skin, and emerged on the other side, where the land rose into rocky hills. The woman's scent lingered here, mingling with the acrid smell of smoke. The camp was close. He did not rest. He could not. The ghosts of his past would not let him. His mind burned with memories of chains and whispered incantations, of cruel hands reaching for his flesh. He would not let that fate claim another. The moon was watching, a silent witness to his vow. Somewhere ahead, the woman waited, and death followed close behind. The hunter moved with the silence of death itself, his bare feet pressing against the cold earth, leaving no trace. The campfire flickered in the distance, casting long shadows against the rock formations. He counted 4 men, hardened, cruel, their eyes gleaming with the promise of wealth. The woman sat near the fire, her gaze focused on the men. The hunter's pulse remained steady. He studied the layout of the camp and noticed the nervous glances exchanged among the men. They were expecting something, perhaps payment for their prize. They did not expect him. A faint gust of wind stirred the leaves, masking the whisper of his approach. He moved behind the first man, a mercenary with a scar across his face. With a swift motion, the arrow lodged into the man's back before any sound could escape his lips. He was dead. The second man turned, sensing something was amiss, but it was too late. A sharpened stake plunged through his throat, the gurgle swallowed by the crackling flames. The third man fumbled for his weapon, but the hunter was fast. A blade found its mark between the man's ribs. He collapsed without a word. The last man, the leader, had time to react. He spun, machete in hand, eyes wild with shock. The hunter did not flinch. He closed the distance in an instant, twisting the man's wrist, forcing the weapon away. A brutal strike to the throat and a final snap of the bone. The woman trembled as he knelt beside her. She did not speak, but her wide eyes held the weight of all she had endured. The hunter gently helped her to her feet. The night was not yet over. Others would come. He had left a message written in blood. The hunt was far from over. The woman held onto his hand as he melted into the darkness. She was frail, her body trembling from exhaustion, but she did not make a sound. Fear had taught her silence. The hunter moved swiftly through the forest, his senses sharpened by the weight of her presence. He was no longer running for himself. He was running for her. The night stretched on, heavy with the scent of blood and damp earth. He knew he could not return to his home. Too many men had died, and their absence would be noticed. There would be trackers, men skilled in following footprints where none existed. He needed time, distance, and a place where the woman could rest. There was a cave hidden in the hills. He had used it before, when his own life had been at risk. It was dry, safe, and unknown to those who hunted him. They pressed forward, his legs burning from the speed at which he moved. His mind remained cold and calculating. He counted the steps it would take to reach the cave. He measured the danger lurking in the trees, the shifting shadows that could be more than just branches swaying in the wind. Dawn bled across the sky as they reached the cave's entrance. The woman sat down and looked at him, eyes full of unspoken questions, but still she did not speak. The hunter crouched at the mouth of the cave, scanning the horizon. He was not fooled by the stillness of the morning. He knew that the hunt was far from over. Somewhere, unseen eyes were already searching for them. The morning air was heavy with tension, and the forest alive with an unseen presence. The hunter remained crouched at the cave's entrance, his ears attuned to the whispers of the wind. The woman sat on a bed of dry leaves, her exhaustion finally overcoming her fear. She had not asked where they were going. She had not asked who he was. Perhaps she already knew. He had not saved her, not yet. He studied the ground, noting the faint impressions left by their hurried escape. He had been careful, but even the careful do leave traces behind. The men who hunted him would not stop at the bodies in the camp. They would search, track, follow. They would come, and he will be waiting for them. He began his work, placing traps around the perimeter, sharpening stakes from fallen branches, and weaving nooses from vines. His movements were deliberate and precise. This was not just defense. This was preparation for war. The woman reached her hand out, her thin fingers tracing the rough walls of the cave. She did not speak, but her eyes followed him as he worked. He wondered if she understood the danger, if she knew that the moment he had taken her from the camp, he had painted a target on both their backs. The sun climbed higher, and a bird took flight from a distant tree. This was a signal. They had found the bodies. The hunter exhaled, steadying his pulse. He had lived in the shadows for so long, striking from darkness and disappearing like a ghost. But ghosts did not protect the living. For the first time in years, he would stand and fight. The men moved like wolves, their eyes scanning the undergrowth, their machetes gleaming in the afternoon sun. They had found the camp, the bodies, and the blood, and now they sought revenge. The hunter watched them from above, perched on a limb of a great tree, his body as still as the bark beneath his fingers. He counted 6 men. They were better trained than the last group. Their movements were calculated. They had expected resistance. They had come prepared. The woman remained hidden in the cave. She had understood without words what was at stake. The first trap was triggered. A man screamed as he clutched his foot. The snares had caught their first victim. The others reacted instantly, moving in formation, scanning the trees and barking orders. The hunter did not move. Another man fell as his foot got caught by the snare. The remaining 4 hesitated now, their confidence wavering. They had expected a man, not a ghost. The hunter struck. A silent arrow, aimed with deadly precision, found its mark in the skull of the 3rd man. The other men threw their machetes blindly into the trees, the swishing noise cutting through the silence. But the hunter was already gone. He moved like a wind through the branches, unseen and unheard. The last 3 men pressed forward, abandoning stealth for speed. That was a mistake. The hunter shot a 2nd arrow, and a 4th body lay on the ground. The remaining 2 men turned, fleeing into the jungle, their bravado shattered. The hunter let them go. They would carry the message that the albino was not prey, he was the storm. The survivors ran. The hunter followed, but not to kill them. He had made his point. He wanted to listen, to learn. The men stumbled through the undergrowth, out of breath, and their voices sharp with panic. The hunter stayed close, moving unseen, catching fragments of their conversation. The chief will send more men. The buyer will not accept failure. The woman must be found. The hunter's jaw tightened. He had expected retaliation, but this was something else. The men who had taken the woman were not acting alone. They were part of something larger, a network. His blood ran cold. He himself had once been sold. He would not let it happen again. He turned back, his mind already forming a plan. He could run, take the woman away and disappear, but the hunters would not stop. As long as there was a price on their flesh, they would be hunted. There was only one solution. The hunter had to end the hunt. The night fell, heavy and black. The hunter moved through the village like a shadow, his breath slow and measured. The scent of burning wood filled the air. A voice is rising from the gathering place in the center of the village. He had been here before. He had stood in chains in this very place, but now he walked free. The chief sat on his wooden throne, flanked by armed guards, his face lined with greed. The hunter did not hesitate. He threw a blade, and a dying gasp was heard. The guards surged forward, but the hunter was faster. He struck with precision, his movements perfected by years of survival. One by one, the guards fell. The chief tried to run, but the hunter caught him. No words were spoken, no mercy was given. The hunt was over. The woman walked beside him, her hand gripping his. The village behind them burning to smithereens. The market was gone. The buyers, the sellers, the hunters, all of them erased. He had no home, no name, but he had a purpose. He would not stop, not until the last hunter became the hunted. And so the legend was born of the albino who would not be caught and sold for his body.